Oh, no. Okay, alright, I'm back. I'm going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and let's talk about that weird thing called AC or armor class. I'm just doing my sound check, making sure everything is working well. This has been waiting for a while. I found the notes for this hanging around in a book that I thought I had finished using, but apparently I haven't done this video. I wrote the notes, never did the video. Anyway, you will find the start time for this video if you're rewatching it down in the description once YouTube publishes it and I get a chance to put the start time in. Now, if you haven't been part of my live streams before, normally what I do is I present everything first and then I open it up for questions and answers and feedback. This is a contentious thing. What is armor class or AC? It's always been contentious. It's very much like hit points because it's such an abstract concept. It doesn't really make a huge amount of sense, but we are going to discuss it today. I've got a few pictures for you, and yes, I do have miniatures, dice, and some basically a battle grid. I'm going to show you what I mean. Essentially, I will actually show you, not just talk about it, but I will show you. Okay, drink of water, and then I'm ready to go. Hopefully I can get this sorted out. Okay, here we go. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. And the topic for today, as it happens, is there's a funny thing in Dungeons and Dragons called AC, or armor class. And there are often many jokes made about the use of armor and how armor works in the game of Dungeons and Dragons. It's actually quite a confusing concept as it happens. But today I'm going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons armor class. Now, for those of you who are wondering, am I going to be talking exclusively about Dungeons and Dragons 5e? No, I'm not. When I talk about armor class, I'm talking about armor class right across every version of the game. Some of the examples I will give are related to Dungeons and Dragons 5e with regard to calculating armor class, but the concept, because this is more a concept video rather than a calculation video, is going to be about armor class in general that has been used in Dungeons and Dragons. So let's just go straight to the player's handbook for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Now, if we turn to page 14, apparently it has the armor class definition there, but it's not really hugely clear because that little sentence that we are provided with is a fraction of the information that was provided in previous versions of the game. So here it is. Your armor class, or AC, represents how well your character avoids being wounded in battle. Or if you are the dungeon master, it represents how well your monsters avoid being wounded in battle. Things that contribute to armor class can include things like armor, shields, and your dexterity modifier. And it then goes on about how not all characters wear armor or carry shields. So that's the basic idea in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. But I'm going to close the book because that's not what we're going to use. Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about armor class in general. So that's a big close the book, put it aside, and let's just think about it in a general concept rather than getting blown out with the idea that, no, it has to be a particular way. So starting off, armor class represents how hard it is for your opponent to land a solid, significant blow that will reduce the hit points for your character or your monster. That's what it represents. So it's about reducing hit points. Now, I know a lot of people get caught up with, no, it's when it hits and does damage, like injuries, physical injuries. And I've done a video on hit points. Go and check that out if you don't know too much about that. But actually what it's talking about is you could hit the target, but it might not be a solid enough blow that it actually reduces hit points. And this is where the abstract concept of armor class tends to make things really confusing for people. So armor class is based on a formula which is 10 plus your dexterity modifier. Now that's if you're wearing no armor and you've got no other special features that contribute to it. But there are a few things that you can have that would change that formula in some way, and that can be added to armor class. So if we stick with the basic formula, things that might change it are the following. So it can be affected by an armor bonus. So maybe if you wear leather armor or plate armor, so wearing some sort of armor will usually increase your armor class rather than reduce it. There are very few things that ever reduce it. In fact, I can't think of too many. Something like a shield bonus for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, a shield is a +2 to your armor class. So if you carry a shield, so it's got to be actually worn or strapped in place. Anything that will increase your dexterity modifier will affect your armor class. Now this is only in relation to certain types of armor. Some certain types of armor have a cap on whether you can add your dexterity modifier to your armor class. Now that's related to Dungeons & Dragons 5e, so more than other things. Something like special abilities, you might pick this up from a racial feature or from a class. Feats, there are feats that allow you to change the formula for calculating your armor class. Things like cover bonuses. So in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, an example is +2 for having half cover. That's when half of your body is covered by something relatively solid and firm, protecting you from being either losing hit points essentially, or being hit. The other one is class abilities, which we talked about. Now, as I said, there are different formulas for some of those classes, such as the Barbarian and the Monk, which have a completely different formula. You can't stack or change your formula. You can't mash them together. You pick one or the other. That's how it works. And then in terms of changing that formula for armor class, something like spell bonuses. So a spell can be cast and that can give you a bonus. Mage armor gives you a bonus. Mage armor is a formula in itself. Okay, when you cast mage armor, you get 13 plus your dexterity modifier. That's how it works, right? Which is great. It's a particular formula, that spell. But there are other spells, such as shield, which give you a +5. It's just a straight +5. It lasts for an entire round of combat, and that just adds straight to your armor class, which is kind of nice. And then you have things that we kind of drool over, and that's your magic items. There's lots and lots of magic items that can change your armor class as well. So those are all the things that can contribute or affect the armor class formula. The higher your armor class, the harder your character or monster is to hit and reduce hit points, or, as some people like to put it, do damage. So these are the things I really wanted to cover, because I have to say that armor class has always confused a lot of my players at my tables. The ones that I really wanted to explain the most are these. There's just some key points with regard to Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Using bound accuracy, this essentially means that armor class does not really change that much. As your character levels up or gains levels, it doesn't actually affect your armor class that much, not unless you are changing the way your armor class is calculated by picking up a different formula from a different class, or you're casting spells, or using any of the other things I just talked about. Okay, so that means that a character should always be threatened, because their armor class will never sort of get to the point where you can only hit them by rolling a 20. Although I have to say, sometimes that does in fact happen, even in Dungeons & Dragons playing at high level. Armor class is very abstract. It's an odd collection of factors that logically it doesn't seem to make sense or even belong together. But they have been dumped together to make the concept of playing the game and the combat side of it easier for people to play. I know that seems strange. If it's more complicated and a bit abstract, how does that make it easier? Let me give you an example. For example, heavy armor like plate armor, that gives you the best armor bonus or larger armor bonus. or the largest armor bonus, makes you quite slow. I mean, in comparison to other types of armor, you're actually slower, but still it's harder to hit you. Now, that's not because you aren't necessarily getting struck by a blow. You might be getting struck by a blow, but it's not doing any significant, it's not a solid enough blow, it's not getting between the plates of armor to actually either wind you or knock the wind out of you, or create an injury or a wound of some kind. The thing to remember is your hit has to hit and do damage or reduce hit points to be effective. So even when we miss, we may have struck the target, but it wasn't sufficient to actually do anything effective that would reduce hit points. Dungeons & Dragons 5e has more than one formula that can be used or has been used to determine armor class based on your monster and your character classes that you select. Now, even monsters have a different way of calculating their armor class. Some monsters have natural armor. Some monsters will actually wear plate armor or other types of armor on them. So that makes it a little bit more complicated and confusing, I do realize. So the formulas they use, monsters compared to characters, is a little bit different. So don't get caught up in that one either. Dungeons & Dragons 5e does not allow you to use more than one formula, as I said, for calculating AC if you are multi-classing. For an attack to hit an armor class and reduce hit points on a monster or character, the attack roll that is made, okay, is going to have to be, you need to be equal to or greater than. For Dungeons & Dragons 5e, it needs to be equal to or greater than. Now, other versions of Dungeons & Dragons might have worked slightly different, particularly if you're dealing with Dungeons & Dragons Advanced, because the second version of the game used THACO, and that's a different formula system completely. The rest of it's reasonably easy to understand, but yes, that's essentially, I just want to cover that quickly. You roll a 20-sided dice, add the attack bonus for your character. If the total result is greater than or equal to the target's armor class, the blow hits and reduces hit points. And that's the thing to remember with regard to armor class. All very simple it seems, but yeah, we'll see. What this means is that attacks that are less than the armor class of a monster or a character, either they miss completely, or they might get deflected, they might even be parried and knocked away by the monster or character that you're fighting, or they strike the target, but they strike it in such a way that maybe it's the flat of a blade, or it strikes and it just sort of slides off, or it strikes the target, and even though it's struck the target, it's not significant because all it's left is like, it's not even like it's maybe a scratch, nothing worth taking off even one hit point. So that's what it's trying to duplicate. This is what makes armor class so hard to understand, because even a missed attack might have actually struck the target, but there's no visible effect and there's no reduction in hit points. Okay, so that is all of the bits and pieces I wanted to talk about with regard to armor class. I do have an example which I'm going to pull up right now, and then I'm going to work my way through this and give you an opportunity to see it in action. There we go. I'm just moving my things into place. Got to have a bigger desk. All right, here we go. So we're on the King's Road, and I've got my here a Hell Giant. Now, a Hell Giant hasn't got much in the way of armor. You can see it's got some pants. It's pretty much naked. And I've got a Barbarian. This is my Barbarian. He's got a great axe. I've got my Ranger. She's got a longbow. So if I make a couple of attacks against our Hell Giant, what might that look like in terms of hitting, and how you would describe it, and how to sort of visualize and understand it? Okay, so let's make some attack rolls. Let's start with the Barbarian. Now, my attack modifier for the Barbarian, I'm just saying it's a level 1 character, so it's +5 to whatever I roll on my 20-sided dice. Okay, so I rolled a 11. 11 plus 5 is 16. Now, the armor class of our Hell Giant is 13, so I got greater than, so equal or greater than, it hits the target. So I've hit my target. Now, I can describe this in a couple of different ways. when I strike the target, it's going to reduce hit points. Now that might be because I've just cut into the leg and there's a bit of bleeding taking place. Or I might have struck the hill giant in the groin with the flat of my blade and I've kind of winded them. They're in shock because they've just been groined. Or even in the chest, if you're tall enough, that is. It's a pretty big giant. So that's one way of sort of describing how it is. It's not necessarily causing cuts and lacerations from the great axe. It might be that you swung the weapon and it didn't cause an injury, but the hill giant had to use so much energy to move out of the way, they're starting to get fatigued and tired. And that's why the hit points are reducing, and that's what represents what's happening when you hit your target. Okay, so if I roll again for our character, now I got quite high. I need to roll a lower number. That's going to hit for sure. That's probably going to low. How low do I need to roll to actually get this? So there we go. That's probably low enough. So that there is a 7. I add my 5. That comes to 7 plus 5 is 12. So that's less than the armor class of the hill giant, which is 13. So how does that look in terms of a miss? Okay, it might be that I swung the great axe, my barbarian swung the great axe, missed completely, or swung the great axe and maybe hit the hill giant in the knee with the flat of the blade, but it didn't even notice it. Or it hit it somewhere where there's a lot of flab and it sort of just bounced off rather than actually cutting into the body. Does that make sense? So that's a miss because it didn't actually reduce hit points. Now with somebody like the ranger firing a longbow, so you make your attack, I rolled a 2. So 2 plus 5 is 7. So 7 is much lower than 13 for armor class on our hill giant, so it misses. So how does that look? It might be as simple as I fire high or low and the arrow misses completely. It might be that you fire your arrow and it hits the hill giant in the back. So it hit the hill giant, but not actually anything that was actually going to affect the reduction of hit points. It might be that the arrow flew past, it did hit the hill giant, but it was on the wrong angle and it sort of got deflected and bounced off a little bit. It might have just slid past, like just a slight graze that isn't even significant enough to reduce it by 1 hit point. So that's a miss with an arrow. What about if I make another attack? Oh, that's going to still miss. That's a 6. That's another 6. We keep rolling 6s and we're in trouble. That's going to miss. That's going to miss. Okay, here's a 13. So 13 plus 5. So that's 18. Now 18 is greater than or equal to the armor class of the hill giant. So we hit our target. Now that might be I fired my arrow and it struck it somewhere and lodged in place. And so it's going to lose hit points. It's taken an injury of some kind. But it's still functioning, it can still fight. It might be that I fired my arrow and that arrow sliced past and caused a small cut. Or I fired that arrow and the hill giant had to use a lot of energy to get out of the way, ducked down, but is now feeling extremely tired because it had to use so much energy. But if it had hit, it would have done a lot of damage. Maybe it was targeted at the head or something like that. So that caused hit points to be reduced. Okay, all of that sort of makes sense, I hope. All right, so what happens if we get rid of the hill giant and we bring in something with a much higher armor class? So let's ditch that one. Let's put in a fire giant. Fire giant's got a lot higher armor class. It's 18 because it's wearing armor. It's got plates all over it and stuff like that. So if we make an attack with our barbarian, I got a 20, so these are critical, plus 5, so it definitely hits. So this might represent, in terms of rolling a critical against your target, so it definitely hit. It's also going to do a lot more damage. So just this particular swing with the great axe has picked like a tendon or an artery in the leg, and slicing into it has caused significant bleeding to occur. So maybe that's one part of it. Managed to find a space between the plates and just nicked that artery. Or you swung with so much force that you have caused a shock wave to go through the fire giant's armor, vibrating it. and it's sort of being shaken around. And so it's actually getting quite tired and exhausted because of the shock wave from that blow was so strong. So it doesn't necessarily, as I said, have to cause physical injuries in the way of cuts and wounds. So there's a hit. Now I'm not going to do quite the same thing with each one of them because it'll take a long time. What about if I roll a miss? Okay, so I hit the target. What if I roll a miss? So I rolled a 7 plus 5. 7 plus 5 is 12, so that misses the armor class on our fire giant. Now, it doesn't matter how you look at it. I might have swung and completely missed my hill giant with the great axe, or I might have swung and hit it in the leg, but because of the way and angle I struck it, it just sort of slid right off. I actually hit the target, but it didn't do any significant damage. Okay. So that's armor and things like that. What about if we are shooting? It's the same sort of process, same sort of concept. Okay, if I were to roll the same number for our ranger, and it misses, then that miss might be it missed completely, or it hit the armor and was deflected off. All right, let's get rid of this. That's pretty easy to understand things that don't wear a lot of armor and things that wear armor. But what happens if you get something like a stone giant? Now, this isn't wearing a lot of armor. Stone giants have a lot of natural armor. Their armor class is a 17. So they're almost as hard to hit as the fire giant that's covered in plate armor. So how does that work in terms of making attacks and how you might describe it and understand it? Well, I'm just going to shuffle those out of the way. Make our attack roll with our barbarian again. Swinging that great axe. I got a 7. Plus 5 is 12. It's not going to hit. It's not greater than or equal to. It's certainly less than 17. So I swing and I miss completely. Or, as I've said before, the other examples, I might have swung, hit the stone giant on its skin, but its skin is so hard and so tough that it didn't actually cause a chip. It didn't cause an injury, or it just slid right past. So it's a miss. Even though the great axe might have actually struck the target, it didn't do anything significant. It just slid on by. Same thing can apply here with the ranger firing a bow. Okay, I might have missed completely and it would be wide, or I might have hit my target and it was deflected off to the side. Now, what about if I actually strike it? This should be pretty clear by now. I've done this a few times. Let's just roll a reasonably high number. It's an 18. 18 plus 5 is 23. Okay, so that's going to hit our target. So our barbarian swings, connects, and it could be that you have now created a small chip to occur in the stone giant. Or you've cut in deep enough that it's actually wounded and there's some sort of icky blood coming out of it. Or you struck it and the vibration is starting to cause it to crack inside even though you can't see an injury on the outside. Or maybe you struck it in such a way that it was so powerful and it was almost going to be a fatal blow or a significant blow, but the stone giant had to sort of throw itself to the side to avoid getting hit. Does that make sense? Now, another thing in terms of missing a target, and I think I did talk about it, if I roll like a 3 and I added a 5 to that, and that's an 8, made my attack and I missed, it might be that the club that the stone giant is wielding came in contact with your blade. So if your great axe swings through and you missed, it may be that what has actually happened is your stone giant has used their club to bash it to the side. So there's a lot of ways you can think of armor class in terms of what's going on. That's why when I say it's an abstract concept, I really do mean it's quite an abstract concept. It can be really confusing, and hopefully I've managed to cover it in a way that you can understand. Now, I have no doubt that there's going to be a whole bunch of people who will get into arguments either with me or somebody else or people at the table. The arguments around armor class have been going on for ages. Please don't do that. If you are still confused, by all means, if you're not too sure what the heck I'm talking about, this is your opportunity to start asking questions in a second. So get ready. Okay, so that is pretty much everything I wanted to cover before we go and answer questions. I'm just going to flick it over to here and just say, look, if you found this video helpful or informative, please share and like the video. If you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting the bell button to be notified when I am live and when I publish new videos. If you want to support my channel, you did so by watching this video. I have hundreds more and you're welcome to go and check them out. The one in particular I would recommend having a look at is the one on what are hit points, because I did that a long time ago and that should be quite helpful for understanding what they are and how they work. Yet another very abstract Dungeons and Dragons concept. Otherwise, there are plenty of Dungeon Master and player videos that you might find useful. I don't do Patreon, but I do have affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon where you can buy stuff online and I get a small commission. And that helps me keep up these videos. Now, this is your opportunity. If you're part of the live chat, put your questions in, put your feedback in. It's all right to disagree with me. Just give me your argument. That's always fine. Or just say hi. And if you're not part of the live stream, use the comment section. That's what it's there for. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, I'm not gone. I am just cycling through and making sure that I've changed my screen to something that I might be able to use with anybody who has any questions. All right, how's it going? Hi, Darren. Hi, Fred. Got to catch the rerun of this one. Early day tomorrow. Fair enough, Darren. He's probably already gone. Archmage. How's it going? Thrifty Steve. Hi, Thrifty Steve. How do you personally decide if an attack that doesn't hit the AC misses completely or hits but does not damage? Well, that's the thing, Thrifty Steve. You can just make it up. You just make it up. There's no secret formula. There's no mathematical calculation. If the blow hits and they lose hit points, you can describe it in many different ways. In terms of answering your specific question around missing, so the attack does not hit the AC, it misses completely, or hits but does no damage. So here's the thing. I have just described all of that right now. I gave you like 3 different examples with a stone giant, a fire giant, and a hill giant to sort of illustrate my point. If that hasn't answered your question, Archmage, let me know and I will try to explain it again. Okay, sorry, what's that? I just came in, so I didn't see the full video. Maybe you talked already about this. So yes, a repeat. Okay, so we'll do that. Give me a second, I have a drink of water and we'll cover it again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick 2 giants and I'm just going to use them as an example for now, so it's nice and easy. What's that, Thrifty Steve? Do you ever penalize a player for critical misses, like rolling a natural 1? Okay, so here's the thing. A natural 1 is an automatic miss, right? But I don't penalize my players, so I don't use critical fumbles for my player characters. I don't say you now have to have a critical fumble because you rolled a 1 on the 20-sided dice. But I do use it occasionally for my monsters to make things a little bit more interesting. Okay, I've done a video on critical fumbles, so you're welcome to check them out, Thrifty Steve. Marcus, new to D&D and I have subscribed to your channel. Keep up the good content, thanks. You're welcome, Marcus. We're going to get back to your question, Archmage. This is the question I have. In case of lots of HP or hit points, how do you decide the hit points to not be all wound without your players getting upset about it? So here's the thing. You have to gauge, if it's a new player, the chances are, you're welcome, Thrifty Steve, you'll find that new players will find it very hard to understand the concept of there being a wound. My suggestion to you is don't start describing that there's a wound has taken place until the monster or the character has suffered, like lost half their hit points. The first edition of the game had a really good way of looking at it. I think the easiest way to understand it is think of a level 1 character. Whatever your level 1 character has in hit points, that is probably all meat. That's probably all meat rather than anything else. But every time your hit points are increasing, then what's happening there is, well, you're not developing more meat. What you're developing is something else. Maybe it's just you're stronger and you don't get fatigued as much, or maybe you're just a lot luckier than a level 1 character compared to a level 20 character. You know, a level 20 character's got a lot of luck, got a lot more stamina, things like that. So it's working like that. So, so I would, as I said, I would suggest don't describe big wounds until you've the characters or the monsters lose about half their hit points. And you don't necessarily have to describe every single wound. It's all right to leave that halfway through or right at the very end. Some monsters don't have enough hit points to even bother with that. Archmage, start at half HP is a good suggestion, yes. And it's not like you have to do it that way. However, some experienced players could see that as a problem. It's only a problem because they don't understand what armor class is. And if you have players that are having trouble understanding armor class, point them towards my video on armor class and hit points, and hopefully that will explain it for them. Now, you did have a question that I was trying to answer, so let's do this and do this example one more time before I go, because we're now on to 30 minutes on this video. So if I'm making attack against the Hell Giant, which has an armor class of 13, and I make my attack, I've got a modifier of +5 for my dice roll. So I rolled a 3. I add my 5, 3 and 5 is 8. 8 is a lot less than the armor class of our Hell Giant, so it's going to miss. Okay, you have to get equal to or greater than to hit, so it misses. So how does that look with a great axe being swung? It misses completely, you swing wide, or maybe you actually hit the target but it bounces off its flabby flesh, or maybe it is parried or knocked away by its big club. That's one way of sort of looking at it in terms of missing the target. Now, with regard to the ranger and firing an arrow, same sort of thing, fire the arrow wide and it's nowhere near the target, or it slides past or is deflected by its flabby skin, or maybe the arrow lodges in the bag, or maybe the arrow is deflected or knocked off out of the way by a blow from the Hell Giant's club. So there's a lot of different ways you can describe it and sort of present it to your players. Now if I roll another attack, I rolled a 14 this time, +5. Both of these characters have got +5 as modifiers, so level 1 characters, okay? So 14 + 5 is 19. 19 is equal to or greater than the armor class of 13 on the Hell Giant, so it hits. So you could say, all right, I've swung and I've struck and I've caused a small gash, or I've struck it and I've bruised the target. Maybe not have actually cut it. I might have actually struck and tried to swing and cut it, but I hit it with the side of the blade, and instead of it cutting into the flesh, it's caused a bruise. Or maybe I swung it and I've swung it into the groin of the Hell Giant and I've kind of winded it. It's sort of winded, or it had to move out of the try to move out of the way, and it's moved into the blow, and so therefore it's got clonked in the face. There's lots of different ways you can sort of present that. Okay, or it managed to avoid getting struck by a very significant blow, but all of that energy used to consume moving out of the way of your big great axe swing is getting really tired. It's getting fatigued because of that blow being so close, and it had to throw all of its weight and energy to one side. So there's a hit. Now what about something like the ranger and the arrow? So the arrow could lodge into your Hell Giant and stay there and cause a wound, or it might slide past and leave a little cut, or it might have to throw itself out of the way to avoid an arrow to the eye, which would have probably been fatal, but it's used up a lot of its energy, or even its luck in some cases. Okay, so that would be using up hit points, but not necessarily the arrow hitting the target, although it did hit the armor class. it's just the way you describe it. Your players are going to find this a little bit hard to understand to begin with, but give them time and they will get it. Okay, so let's deal with something that's actually wearing armor, because it's a little bit different and a little bit different with something that doesn't actually wear armor. When something's wearing armor, it's easier to actually describe those sorts of things. So what if I make the same sort of attack against here? The armor class of this fire giant is 18. It's much, much higher. You're welcome, Archmage. So I rolled a 20, which is a critical. I did that before. It's quite amusing. So 20 plus 5, 25. It's certainly going to hit. It's an automatic critical. So not only did I hit the target, I found a vital point. So I managed to get maybe the great axe from my barbarian through the gap between the plates. And in doing so, I've managed to cut into its flesh. Or I struck it with so much force, and I struck a plate, and although it didn't actually cut into the flesh of our fire giant has taken this huge blow, and it's been winded by the sheer force of your weapon. So there's another way of describing it, as in terms of a hit. And again, same thing, maybe it had to throw itself out of the way. I mean, there's lots of different ways of doing it. Okay, so arrows striking a vital point. You can describe it as, okay, it's lodged in between a plate, just like the great axe. Maybe the arrow's actually stuck in place. He can still fight. He's still up and ready to go, but he's lost some of his luck, or he's lost some of his stamina, or he's lost a little bit of blood, you know, if you want to actually cause an injury of some kind. So there's a 20. There's an actual hit. Now, if I miss, if I can get a low enough dice roll, okay, so I rolled a 4, plus 5 is 9. So 9 is way too low. It's not going to hit the armor class of our fire giant. So with our barbarian, you swing and you might completely miss and doesn't hit the target. Or it hits the plate armor on the legs or on the hips, and the blade is sort of deflected off to the side and it doesn't do anything. Okay, and there's no reduction in hit points. Or this great hammer here is used by the fire giant to knock the blade aside so it doesn't get a chance to actually connect and do anything. The same thing can apply with your arrows. Either you fire an arrow wide and it never ever hits the target, or it bounces off and is deflected off some of the plate armor, or the giant actually uses its weapon to deflect the blow, and it doesn't lose any hit points, it doesn't take any damage in any way. So that's sort of how you can sort of describe it. I think I've covered this pretty significantly now. I've gone over it almost twice, not with every single miniature, but twice is enough. So I'm going to leave it there. I think we have covered everything we need to. Nobody else is asking any questions. You are welcome to rewatch this, and hopefully this will give you a few ideas on how to sort of run your own game and describe the loss of hit points. Can be a tricky thing with players, I absolutely understand. So have a good night, a good morning, a good afternoon, whatever it is in your country or place of residence. Look after your family, look after yourself, and I will see you in the next video. And that's probably going to be on my day off, so I've got one day which is no video tomorrow from me as a live stream. It'll be Saturday in New Zealand before you hear from me again. And what will that video be? I'm pretty sure it's going to be a video on preparing Curse of Strahd. People asked for it. Dungeon Masters asked for a video on how to prepare and run Curse of Strahd. Well, we're going to do one on how to prepare for the Curse of Strahd on Saturday. And that's me. I will see you later.